What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. This is your host, Brandon DeCruz, and on today's episode, we're going to cover the topic of debunking metabolism myths, misconceptions, and claims. And I'm going to go over why starvation mode, metabolic damage, and a slow metabolism doesn't stop fat loss. Really, my goal as a nutrition and coaching professional is to be helpful. And a lot of times I find that many are misinformed and misled, especially on the topics related to metabolism and things of that sort, especially when it comes to metabolism and dieting related topics. There are a lot of misconceptions and claims that are not substantiated yet. They're put out so often that people will take them as fact when in fact they're not factual whatsoever. So on today's podcast, I'm going to break down a full list of different metabolism myths and really get into some of the nitty gritty details so you guys understand these better. And I want to empower you guys through education. So the first myth that I'm going to go through is myth number one, which is you've eaten so little, you've gone into starvation mode, which is why you can no longer lose fat. So there's this commonly said statement within the nutrition industry that if you eat too few calories during a diet, your body will stop losing fat as a result of that lowered calorie intake. And this is often referred to as going into quote unquote starvation mode. And starvation mode is the concept that if you eat too little calories during a fat loss phase, your body will eventually go into starvation mode and you won't be able to lose fat and lose weight as a result of eating too little. Due to this concept picking up steam over the past, say, 10 to 15 years, I've encountered a ton of individuals interested in dropping body fat and improving their body composition who believe that the reason that they didn't get as lean as they desired during their last dieting phase was because they didn't eat enough calories, and this caused their body to go into this starvation mode where they were unable to lose any more weight. Now, in some cases, there are even claims made about that when someone starts to gain weight on a low calorie diet, it's because their metabolism has shut down and their body has entered this starvation mode. The idea that you can eat such a low amount of calories that you will shut down your metabolism and go into this starvation mode where you're unable to lose weight despite being in a calorie deficit is both theoretically and then also practically impossible. First and foremost, if you eat a very low calorie diet, you will lose more weight during a fat loss phase, not less weight, as a result of eating and sustaining that low calorie intake. Eating a very low calorie diet, such as an 800 to 1200 calorie diet, are what are used in some of the most successful and tightly controlled weight loss studies, such as those done by prominent researchers in obesity medicine, such as Michael Rosenbaum, Rudy Leibel, and Katia Martins. And they found that these low calorie diets yield significant and substantial weight loss outcomes time and time again. And we see this in the literature. I mean, there's substantial evidence that reinforces this. So, for example, in a 2016 study by Rosenbaum and Leibel, they used an 800 calorie per day liquid diet to cause individuals with obesity to lose 20% of their body weight. Now, keep in mind, a 20% reduction is a larger degree of weight loss than we're currently seeing in the semaglutide, aka Wegovy and Ozempic trials. And this is important to acknowledge because GLP-1 agonists are the most powerful weight loss drugs we have created to combat the obesity epidemic. So if it were true that eating too little causes stalling in weight loss, there would be no way that these individuals would have been able to continue dropping weight, especially not being able to lose a fifth of their total body weight. Also, the average weight of the individuals in this trial by Rosenbaum and Leibel was 126.9 kilograms, which is around 279 pounds. And they had a maintenance calorie intake at the start of this study of over 3,150 calories. And they were put onto an 800 calorie controlled diet. So their daily deficit was around 2,350 calories per day, which is a massive deficit, much larger than many of you out there are even, sustaining for a day, let alone for months at a time. So if starvation mode existed, these individuals would have experienced it, especially by the end of the study, as they went from around 127 kilograms to 100 kilograms on average. So that's a loss of 59 pounds, which is a very significant amount of weight loss. Secondly, for those who tell you that you've gained weight from eating too little, that's literally impossible, as that would disprove the law of thermodynamics, which states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, which has never been done or seen. This is literally a scientific law that's been around since the 1800s. So we've had plenty of time to disprove it, yet that has yet to be done. I've been working in this industry since the early 2010s when this myth of starvation mode really started picking up steam. And I believe this hypothesis is a gross misextrapolation of the concept of metabolic adaptation, which is something we've discussed many times on this podcast. And if you guys would like me to go into that even further on a future podcast, just feel free to reach out and let me know because I could do an updated metabolic adaptation masterclass, essentially. But metabolic adaptation is essentially the physiological effect we see where our body looks to conserve energy by downregulating calorie expenditure when we've been in a deficit and have lost a substantial amount of weight. Although metabolic adaptation exists and is certainly real, starvation mode is not. And this is something I really want to get across to you in the audience. Also, it's important to realize that metabolic adaptation is a temporary state that's caused by going into a substantial deficit, so we can reverse these effects by going back to maintenance calories or above maintenance, which is why I will transition clients right into a metabolic restoration phase or a recovery diet after we've reached their fat loss goal, so I can start working on reversing and attenuating the diet and the deficit-induced metabolic adaptations caused by the active weight loss phase, and so I can get their metabolism back online and functioning well. However, even with metabolic adaptation, which is something that researchers have been testing and monitoring since the 1940s, we see that being in a deficit for a prolonged period of time and losing a significant amount of body weight does reduce our energy expenditure levels. But even in large deficits, the magnitude of adaptation you experience will not stop your ability to lose fat and weight, especially over shorter timescales of 6 months or less of active dieting. And this is something that's been tested time and time over again. And for those of you out in the audience, you really shouldn't be dieting for more than 6 months anyway. This is something that I've covered in many other podcasts, especially I did a cut versus bulk podcast in the 90s, the episodes like somewhere in the 90 episodes landmark. And essentially what I was trying to get across within that podcast series, and it was really about lean building phases and really prioritizing the process of muscle growth, is you shouldn't be spending the entirety of your diet unless you are someone living with adiposity and living with excess body fat to the point that it's metabolically unhealthy and it's compromising your health, your longevity, and your quality of life. So let's look into the evidence on dieting, as all the good evidence we have on the topic, both in terms of real world evidence and research evidence, finds that starvation mode doesn't exist. Meaning, if someone out there, one of you guys out there, is truly in a calorie deficit, they will lose body mass as the body cannot create energy and add mass and energy to our body stores if we are in a state of negative energy balance, aka a calorie deficit. Before I go into the research evidence, let's discuss what I've seen in the trenches, seeing as I've been in the fitness industry for about 15 years, and I've also been coaching for the past 11 plus years. I myself have gotten into stage shape 15 times over the past decade, and have also done 100 plus photo shoots where I've been measured as low as 4.7% body fat on a body comp assessment. So I have a ton of experience pushing myself during contest preps, photo shoot preps, and fat loss phases. So if starvation mode did occur at low calorie levels and when getting to very low body fat percentage, I think I would have picked up on this, especially as I'm very analytical and I track everything. I've also been doing this for so long that I know my body, so I would know if I was having very big feedback or pushback at certain calorie levels and not actually losing body fat anymore. Although I have noticed that I've needed to drop my calories fairly low to be able to get into contest condition. And mind you, this is 5% body fat or lower, which is far lower than many people need to get to, want to get to, or will ever get to. And also I've noticed that there's times that I've had in my life where I've needed to drop my calories lower than expected to get ready for photo shoots. As long as I've tracked my calorie intake and my steps and maintain a high level of physical activity, I've never had a diet where I didn't lose weight across the course of the phase. I've also worked with well over 1,000 clients of all different backgrounds, ranging from IFBB professional bodybuilders and physique competitors to high achievers who are CEOs of large corporations to even lifestyle clients who I often refer to as my Lifestyle Lisa and Gen Pop gyms. Up until this point, I've never worked with a client who could not lose weight and who went into this theoretical starvation mode. I have had clients who have come to me under the misguided belief that they were metabolically resistant, which is a term that is often used in the functional health space. And in their mindset, they were unable to lose weight. But with these individuals, I've dug in under the hood during a primer phase, and I've discovered that it wasn't that they couldn't lose weight when in a deficit. It was another factor that was limiting their fat loss results. And this has included many different factors. So I'll go over a few that I've encountered with clients over the years. So one would be hypothyroidism. So clients who have come to me who had hypothyroidism and weren't aware of it is something that I've encountered quite often, because actually 60% of individuals with thyroid disease are unaware of it. So the fact that they've had a downregulated thyroid production has impacted their calorie expenditure levels and reduced their energy expenditure, which is why when they eat in a small deficit, they didn't see the weight loss they expected. Another common situation that I've encountered is those using a generic calorie calculator to determine how much to eat. I've had many individuals who come to me who say that they've eaten a deficit and haven't lost weight. But when I ask more questions, I realize they eat in what they thought was a deficit based on what they were given from a generic online calorie calculator. Now, what you have to realize is that these generic equations are highly inaccurate on the individual level, with some studies showing that they're off by an average discrepancy of between 300 to 450 calories just on the level of the resting metabolic rate, which only accounts for about 60% of the calories you burn per day. So then this area is increased and compounded even more when you take that BMR estimate and you plug it into a TDE calculator to determine your maintenance calorie intake, because often now you have an inaccurate BMR, and then people, and this has been seen in so many studies over the years, and I see this even just in interactions with clients, they'll tell me they're very active and they get like 6,000 steps. And it's just a misperception of how active they actually are. The other issue that I've seen is misestimations in calorie tracking. So another situation I've encountered with individuals who struggle with losing weight is simple errors and misestimations in calorie tracking, which is erase the deficit that they think they've created and that they think that they're in. So a review on the topic of calorie tracking found that underreporting of food intake is one of the fundamental obstacles preventing individuals from losing weight. The prevalence of underreporting ranges from 18 to 54% on average, but can be as high as 70% in particular subgroups of people. And I found that once I've addressed and improved these factors and more, the person who came to me thinking their metabolism is broken starts to lose weight, which not only disproves this theory of starvation mode, but even more importantly, it breaks down these self-limiting beliefs this individual has developed and built around their ability to lose body fat and improve their body composition and metabolic health, which really is my intention, even in today's podcast, with dispelling this myth. I have this conversation so often with clients that I feel the need to put this out on a public platform so those out there in the audience that may believe these are more informed and more aware, and they're able to move past these self-limiting beliefs. The thing I think is wild about starvation mode, and the fact that it's still a myth, that's prevalent 10 to 15 years after it first gained momentum and sprouted wings, is that we have research dating back to the mid-1940s that disproves this theory and disproves that starvation mode even exists. What's even more ironic is the study is literally called the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. So if any dieters were going to experience the effects of starvation mode, it would have been the men that were enrolled in this study, because this literally was a starvation experiment. The Minnesota Starvation Experiment was a clinical trial conducted at the University of Minnesota between 1944 and 1945. The intention of this study was to see the physiological effects of famine-like conditions so that they would be able to develop dietary rehabilitation strategies and programs for those returning from World War II, as many were facing food shortages and food insecurity during this time period. In order to test how a condition like famine would affect healthy individuals' physiology, this research group set up a trial that put individuals on a very low-calorie diet for an extended period of time, and they studied them both before and after this period of chronic underfeeding. In this study, they took men who were conscientious objectors of the war, but who had volunteered to partake in a year-long study to be able to, essentially advance the science of nutrition in an effort to help those who were serving in the war once they did return home. So they took a group of 36 healthy males who were in the age ranges of 22 to 33 years old and initially had them on a maintenance calorie intake of 3,200 plus calories per day. Once they placed them into the semi-starvation phase of the study, they cut their daily calorie intake from around that 3,200 calories per day to around 1,560 calories per day for 24 weeks. This placed the men into approximately a 50+% calorie deficit. So this was a massive deficit. Now, throughout the course of the semi-starvation period, they lost an average of 25% of their total body weight, which is a massive amount of body weight, especially as these individuals were already lean to begin with. So, for example, these participants started out at an average body weight of around 152.8 pounds and were down to around 115 pounds by the end of the 24-week aggressive deficit period. So they lost almost 38 pounds in 24 weeks and got down to like 5% body fat or less. Just for context and for comparison, one of the most cited studies we have on a high dose of GLP-1 drug, semaglutide, which is the STEP 1 trial by Wilding et al., elicited a weight loss of an average of 14.9% of body weight, or around 34 pounds, in adults who were actually in the overweight or obese category. And that happened over the course of 68 weeks or 17 months. So if we just compare and contrast, these lean individuals lost over 10% more of their body weight in just 6 months. So this is how drastic of a period of calorie restriction these men were under. So if anyone was going to go into starvation mode and stop losing weight, it would be them. So it wouldn't be just your average dieter, your yo-yo dieter, you're someone in the general population. So the Minnesota starvation experiment literally shows that starvation mode doesn't exist, as it's not like these men stopped losing weight throughout the course of the study from eating too little. And in fact, because of the fact that we all have different metabolisms and respond differently to energy deficits and weight loss, the research team continued to adjust their diet throughout the starvation period to ensure they reached a loss of 25% of their body weight over that 24-week period. So when they weren't losing weight as expected, they lowered calories even more to speed up the rate of weight loss. Although the Minnesota starvation experiment was conducted well over 80 years ago, we have hundreds of weight loss trials which find that when calories are controlled, individuals will continue dropping weight and losing weight due to being in a state of negative energy balance. And within the overall body of evidence, we have it's actually seen that when individuals are in lab controlled settings and all their food is being provided to them so that every calorie can be controlled and accounted for, the less calories they put participants on and the greater or larger calorie deficit they create, the faster they lose weight and the more total weight loss is achieved. So we have another 80 years of research and evidence to elucidate the fact that starvation mode doesn't exist. Also, another example that blatantly disproves the notion of starvation mode is a case study of a successful therapeutic fast that lasted 382 days. In the study, Angus Barberi, who's often referred to as Mr. AB, did a 382-day medically supervised fast where he existed on just electrolytes, vitamins, and zero-calorie drinks and beverages like tea, coffee, and sparkling water. Over that year plus, a long period, he lost 276 pounds, going from a starting weight, hear this out, of 456 pounds to 180 pounds. So Angus lost weight at an average of over 0.7 pounds per day, so right around 3/4 of a pound per day for more than a year, despite consuming zero calories. So if anyone was going to suffer from starvation mode, it was literally this guy that was going without calories for a full year plus. And even despite consuming zero calories, his body still didn't go into starvation mode. He was also able to maintain a healthy body weight even 5 years after finishing the fast. And we see that 5 years after they did a follow-up trial on him, and he was maintaining a body weight of 196 pounds. So he maintained a total weight loss of 260 pounds, yet didn't suffer from starvation mode or permanent metabolic damage, which is a concept we'll discuss later in the podcast. On to myth number 2, which is the concept that your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, will continue to drop lower and lower the more weight you lose. Many people claim that the more weight you lose and the longer you diet for, the more your BMR will drop until the point where you're not able to lose any more fat because your metabolic rate is so low. Physiologically, this just makes no sense, as there's a limit to how much metabolic rate can reduce, as our body can only decrease its metabolic rate so much as it needs, because this is the amount of energy we need to survive. So if your metabolic rate kept declining until the point where it was non-existent, you'd literally be dead, because our metabolic rate encompasses the amount of calories we burn at rest just to keep the lights on and to stay alive. So it's basically the amount of calories we burn if we were to lay in bed all day and not engage in any activity. How much our metabolic rate can reduce in response to weight loss has been heavily tested and heavily analyzed by Rosenbaum and colleagues from Columbia University. In one of their tightly controlled metabolic ward studies, they took a group of adults living with obesity and put them into a weight loss intervention. What's great about this study is this was a group mostly made up of females, which many claim tend to adapt harder to dieting. So this is a great way to test if metabolic rate continues to slow down with more and more weight loss. And despite the fact that this is mostly in females, it also has males as well. So this is a fully all-encompassing study which shows us the effects of harsh dieting on both males and females. So during 3 points in the study, they measured their resting metabolic rate, their activity energy expenditure, which is encompassed really by meat, and then their total daily energy expenditure. And they took these measurements prior to putting these individuals on the diet, so when they were weight stable at their normal body weight. And then they also measured them again after they lost 10% of their body weight, and then again after losing 20% of their body weight. To induce this great degree of weight loss, they put these individuals on an 800 calorie per day liquid diet, where they had them lose 10% of their body weight initially and had them go back to maintenance for 6 to 8 weeks before putting them back on that 800 calorie liquid diet to lose another 10% of their body weight. So by the end of the trial, they had lost 20% of their body weight. So when we look at this, the individuals in this study were on an 800 calorie diet for a very long period of time. And they also were in a 2,350 calorie deficit where they lost 59 pounds, which is massive and clinically significant. Now, when we look at the results, it disproves this theory that RMR just continues to get slower with more and more weight loss. When measuring their RMR across the course of the study, they found that it did significantly decrease after the first period of 10% weight loss. And that's just normal, natural adaptation to dieting. We see that in almost every weight loss study. When you get to 10% of body weight or higher, we generally see an adaptation at the level of the BMR or the RMR in this case. However, it did not continue to go down significantly after 20% weight loss. And this is because there's a threshold or a limit to how much our resting metabolic rate can drop even with substantial decreases of weight loss. Because RMR is the amount of energy our body needs to maintain basic bodily functions. So it's not like this can just continue to decline or you'd literally be dead. You would not be able to have your heart rate, to have blood pressure, to have pulse. Like all these natural bodily processes would cease to exist essentially. However, when they measured individuals' activity energy expenditure, they found that it continued to drop the more and more weight that was lost. Their activity energy expenditure, which in this case was their NEAT, so their non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And the reason that it was just from the NEAT component was because they did no formal exercise throughout this study. But that went down by an average of 262 calories per day after 10% weight loss, and then 515 calories per day with 20% weight loss. So these findings support other research we have that finds that reductions in NEAT account for up to 89 or 85 to 90% of the decrease in calories burned per day during an active weight loss period due to diet-induced metabolic adaptations. So when it comes to calories burned from NEAT during a diet, the more weight you lose, the more likely this is to decline, which is why I've spoken about NEAT so frequently over the years. I've done many podcasts on this. I've done many posts on this, and which is another reason why I believe we need to pay attention to monitoring and maintaining NEAT by tracking steps, especially during a fat loss phase. This is one of the most essential habits that you guys can get into to really be able to thwart weight loss plateaus and really be able to accelerate your rate of weight loss, as well as make sure that you're losing body fat at the most effective rate possible. On to myth number 3, which is you can permanently downregulate and damage your metabolism via metabolic adaptation, or metabolic damage rather. Sorry for that incorrect statement, because I'm so used to actually saying the right term that it's hard for me to actually get out the wrong term, which is this metabolic damage that has been perpetuated for so many years. So metabolic damage is the concept that metabolic adaptation and adaptive thermogenesis persists beyond the active weight loss phase itself, where your metabolic rate stays permanently suppressed even when you get out of a deficit and back to maintenance. Proponents of this theory claim that if you go through a long period of weight loss, you will incur metabolic damage, which will make it so that your body is unable to lose fat in the future as a result of damaging or breaking your metabolism from the process of dieting. If this myth was true, weight cycling, which is where people lose and gain weight over and over again throughout the course of their lives, wouldn't be nearly as common as it is, especially in the general population today, because after that first period of crash dieting, those individuals would develop metabolic damage and would be unable to lose weight again in future dieting phases. The question of whether metabolic damage exists was analyzed in a 2016 systematic review, where they looked at if prolonged calorie restriction exhibits a permanent negative effect on our metabolism. In order to test whether metabolic damage in fact exists, the analyzed studies were significant, and in many cases, extreme amounts of weight loss were achieved through long periods of being in a deficit. In this systematic review, they looked at studies such as the Minnesota Starvation experiment, which we just discussed, and they did that because this was a study where participants lost, a quarter of their body weight and got down to minimal levels of essential body fat. So they were averaging around 5% body fat on average. They also looked at the Biosphere experiment, which was a 2-long-year weight loss study and research on chronically undernourished individuals, including studies on females suffering with eating disorders such as anorexia. Their intention at looking at these studies were to really test this metabolic damage hypothesis, because if anyone were going to suffer from metabolic damage, it would have been these individuals from one of these studies, such as the men in the Minnesota semi-starvation experiment who lost 25% of their body weight in 6 months, or individuals with anorexia who have spent years insufficiently fueling themselves and literally living in a deficit. In all of the studies analyzed in this review, they found that the dieters' metabolic rates were restored and increased back to baseline levels once they returned to eating at maintenance and regained the lean mass they had lost. So there was no permanent metabolic damage found in any one of these studies, which led them to conclude, and I quote, "Previous reports may have come to erroneous conclusions in favor of the metabolic damage hypothesis because they did not examine the full recovery period in the Minnesota experiment or neglected the influence of energy balance on resting metabolic rate. Our findings indicate that the theory of permanent diet-induced metabolic slowing in non-obese individuals is not supported by the current literature," end quote. So essentially what this means is the myth of metabolic damage is one of the many examples where people take something with a grain of truth and twist it to sell it fragility narrative, which they tell you they have the fix and solution for. It's always this ironic situation where it's like, you have this thing, I'm giving you this diagnosis. Oh, and I also have the fix. And so I believe the reason why metabolic damage is one of those myths that's become so widespread and has been perpetuated so many times is because the body does try to conserve energy when we're actively losing weight and in a calorie deficit. But that's metabolic adaptation, not metabolic damage, as this adaptation does not completely halt or stop weight loss, nor is it permanent. However, there are so many fitness professionals who push this theory and expose their audiences to it, and this causes those in the general population to confuse the fact that their metabolic rate lowers during weight loss to be a sign of metabolic damage. But this is exactly what we'd expect to see at a reduced and lowered body weight after being in a substantial deficit for an extended period of time. We know that there are metabolic adaptations that occur during a calorie deficit, but what's important for you to realize is that all of these adaptations are reversible when we get back to our maintenance calories, as increasing our calorie intake can independently increase our metabolism, as our metabolisms aren't static or fixed. They're actually dynamic and adaptive, so they respond to the inputs that you get it. So if you're ever worried or ever have been worried about your metabolism being damaged from your prior dieting history, let me put your mind at ease. I've literally worked with hundreds of clients, especially women, who have come to me after many years, if not decades of dieting, and I've been able to help them lose weight and lose especially body fat and get lean in the future. So I've been able to help them get to an even leaner state than they've ever been at previously. And I've also worked with a ton of individuals who have a history of yo-yo dieting from being on this vicious dieting cycle. Yet we've been able to lose fat and improve their body composition because the human metabolism is regenerative, not degenerative. So on to the next myth. Next up is myth number 4, which is you've gained weight due to having a slow metabolism. First of all, overweight individuals actually have a higher metabolic rate than leaner and lighter individuals due to having higher body mass, which is one of the key determinants of your metabolic rate, aka the amount of calories you burn at rest. If you've gained a significant amount of weight over time, that has required you being in a surplus and eating more calories per day, which also raises your thermic effect of feeding and your metabolic rate. So if you've been overfeeding and that's what has resulted in that excess body weight or excess body fat that you've accumulated, you're actually increasing your resting energy expenditure as a result of that. So it's not a low metabolic rate that often causes some people to gain more fat than others, but rather low levels of need due to having low activity levels. So this is a situation where a person has a higher metabolic rate than a leaner individual, but their total calorie intake continues to exceed their total daily energy expenditure due to them having low physical activity levels and low NEAT levels, which is a significant contributor to the total amount of calories we burn per day and can range between accounting for 15 to 50% of the total amount of calories someone burns per day. So say, for instance, you are someone with low NEAT, you could have a very low energy expenditure from that component of your total daily energy expenditure, and that is causing you to be in a surplus, a much larger surplus than you'd be if you were very highly active, like someone that is lighter, leaner, and is able to eat more food than you and stay in a lean, healthy state. This myth that having a low metabolic rate automatically predisposes you to gaining weight in the future, or that it's the reason why you've gained weight, is not only fatalistic and incorrect, but it's also been disproven many times in the literature. Not to mention the fact that most people have never accurately and methodically tested their metabolic rate. It's never like they went to a lab, they ever went to a metabolic cart, gotten doubly labeled water done on them. These are all things that are lab grade technologies, which you would need to go through extensive protocols to be able to get done. And many people just assume that they have a slow metabolism when they've never actually gotten an objective assessment of it. So that's the first error in this assumption. However, we have research that does test individuals' metabolic rates in an accurate manner to see if having a low basal metabolic rate is predictive of future weight gain. So a 2016 study looked at 757 individuals and assessed each individual's basal metabolic rate and body composition in terms of their fat-free mass and fat mass. They then separated these individuals into the top and bottom 15 percentiles based on their BMR adjusted for their level of fat-free mass and fat mass, age, and sex. There was a significant difference in BMRs between the top 15% group, which was labeled as the high BMR group, but an average BMR of 2,001 calories per day, as compared to the bottom 15% group, which was labeled as the low BMR group. So this would be the slow metabolism group, essentially. And they had a BMR of 15 and 10 calories per day. So we're talking nearly a 500 calorie lower BMR for those in the slow metabolism group, as compared to those in the high or the fast metabolism group. They then followed these participants over the next close to 10 years. It was like 9.7 years. And what they wanted to do was to monitor their changes in weight over that time period. They found that there was no significant difference in the rate of weight gain between both the top, aka the fast metabolism group, and the bottom, aka the slow metabolism group. When they analyzed the exact rate of weight gain per year, it was found that those with the fast metabolism actually gained 1.1 pounds per year and around 11 pounds over that 10-year time period, as compared to those in the slow metabolism group who gained less than 0.66 pounds per year, or around 6.6 pounds over that decade. So if anything, those with the slow metabolism actually gain less weight, and they actually gain less than we'd expect, as research from the Agency of Health finds that most adults tend to gain at an average rate of 1.1 to 2.2 pounds per year during adulthood, which adds up to around 11 to 22 pounds per decade, as compared to those with these quote-unquote slow metabolisms that only gain 6.6 pounds over that decade. These findings show that having a slower metabolism does not predict greater weight gain long-term, despite the fact that the average difference in BMR for the participants in the top and bottom group differed by around 500 calories per day, which is substantial. Ultimately, we cannot control our metabolic rate in a really influential and impactful way. But if we focus on what's within our control, we can make a massive difference. And what's within our control are habits around nutrition, training, our physical activity levels, our sleep, and our stress management. So slow metabolism isn't responsible for whether you gain weight or not. It really comes down to your habits, your behaviors, actions, decisions, and lifestyle. And this is what we really need to focus on, because a lot of people are losing sight of the forest for the trees, essentially. So the fifth and final metabolism myth that I'm going to debunk is having a slow metabolism, aka low resting metabolic rate, is limiting your ability to lose fat. I often hear individuals say that the reason that they've struggled with losing weight and getting lean is because they have a quote-unquote slow metabolism. This is such an often made statement that it's become treated as though it's fact, when it's not. My goal as a coach is to seek first to understand and then to be understood. So I'll often ask more questions to see where this client has gotten this from. And 9 out of 10 times when I've had this conversation, the client has heard that a slow metabolic rate is a large anchor for weight and fat loss. And almost every single time I've had this conversation, the person has never even had their RMR tested. So they're assuming that their metabolic rate is slow based off of their previous weight loss and fat loss results, or just their dieting experiences. Now, here's the thing. If our metabolic rate, or how fast your metabolism is, explains or is accountable for whether you can lose weight or not, then there should be a relationship between resting metabolic rate and weight loss in the literature. Now, at first glance, I understand that this sounds logical, that if someone has a lower metabolic rate, it would make weight loss more difficult than those with a higher metabolic rate. But what we have to realize is that metabolic rate is only one of 4 components of the total amount of calories you burn per day. And in research, we do not see that those with low metabolic rates lose fat or lose less fat during a diet than those with a high metabolic rate, nor do we see that those with higher or the highest baseline metabolic rates start or end diets leaner than those with lower metabolic rates, which is actually something I covered in detail in one of our throwback episodes, which was episode 69 of the show on adaptive metabolisms and metabolic phenotypes. However, we have research that directly looks at this. So in a 2017 study published in the Journal of Clinical Obesity, they looked at the associations between resting metabolic rate and weight loss to see if having a low metabolic rate, aka slow metabolism, impacted weight loss in a negative manner. This study looked at close to 400 individuals and adults in a weight loss management clinic, and they looked at 2 main things. They looked at the relationship between one's baseline resting metabolic rate and weight loss outcomes, and the association between the change in one's resting metabolic rate from dieting and from significant weight loss. And what they did was they found that both the men and women in the study lost a significant amount of body weight, with males averaging 6 kilograms of weight loss and females averaging 5.6 kilograms of weight loss. So both sexes successfully lost weight. Now, when looking at the 2 primary focuses of the study, they found that there was no relationship between an individual's baseline RMR and their weight loss outcomes for both men and women, meaning if someone had a low metabolic rate at the start of the study, it did not slow their rate of weight loss. In terms of the associated change between RMR and weight loss, the larger drops in a dieter's RMR were actually associated with greater weight loss outcomes, which shows that having a lower metabolic rate isn't preventing you from losing weight, but more so, it's reverse causality. So really what it is that the more weight you lose, the higher the likelihood that your RMR will drop, which is actually a sign of successful weight loss. And this is because if you've lost a significant amount of weight and a substantial amount of weight, you've been very successful at weight loss, essentially you're going through metabolic adaptation. So that's a result of the fact that you've lost a clinically significant amount of weight. So ultimately, this study shows that your metabolism is not halting your ability to lose weight, even if it's slow or if it's on the low side. This is why I'm such a big proponent of focusing on the factors within our control. I'm very big with clients of focusing within your locus of control and really making sure we're not focusing on genetics or metabolic rate or things that are really outside of things we can work on a daily basis or improve in a short period of time. And so really with my clients, I try to get across to them, let's focus on the fundamentals and the foundation, which is maintaining a quality and nutrient dense diet, consistently training hard and in a manner that's going to be progressive and it's going to help you build lean mass, which is going to boost your metabolic rate over time. And then also incorporating some type of movement practice into their daily lives, whether that be walking, gardening, something that you're active and you're up and you're doing something, especially when the goal is losing fat and maintaining a lean, healthy physique, rather than allowing them to get fixated on whether they have a slow metabolism or fast metabolism or great genetics or poor genetics. These are things that are completely out of our control. Let's stay in our lane and really focus on the things that will drive us forward. I hope listening to this podcast not only enlightened you to some new information, but also empowered you through the education it provides. If y'all like these myth busting episodes, please let me know and I'll do more episodes like this because I've actually been doing the last few podcasts based off feedback I've been getting on Instagram, based on the posts I've been making, and then also listener feedback and audience feedback, both from my personal clients and then also from loyal listeners of the show that have given me feedback about episodes they would like to do. So for instance, the thyroid physiology podcast that I did with Dr. Scott, I have another episode being released, or at this time it would have already been released, on doing a deep dive into thyroid hormone physiology, thyroid hormone health specifically, and then also hypothyroidism. There was a podcast that I just released on rapid fat loss days and protein sparing modified fast. And that was a listener and audience request. And so really what I'm trying to do is make this as impactful and beneficial for you guys as possible. I know that you spend, close to an hour every single week with me. So I truly appreciate your time. And if you guys need anything from me, feel free to reach out to me. So essentially the things you guys can reach out to me for are listener feedback on the podcast or for one-on-one coaching, which is my bread and butter. If so, feel free to reach out to me through my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram, which is @BrandonDeCruz_. And then also, please remember to follow the show on Spotify and iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. And then the biggest thing is to share this on your stories. Let this reach someone within your network, whether it be a family member, a friend, a client. Really, I'm just trying to spread great information and really help to bridge that gap between research and practical application. So each and every one of you out there can really live a life of abundance and look better, feel better, and function better. As always, guys, have yourself a great week, and thank you for listening.